Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We will begin shortly. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar tonight, Creating Top of the Table Charcuterie Boards. My name is Will Crosswell, Chief Retail Officer for Arden Credit Union. We've had several virtual workshops, and sometimes technology is not the easiest to use, so please be patient with us. And we know there is a lot going on in our lives right now, and always know that Arden is here for you. And if you have any additional banking or borrowing needs, please keep us in mind. If you need to ask a question during the workshop, please click the Questions tab and type in your question. The photo to the left is the screen of an iPad, and the photo to the right is the screen of a desktop. If you are viewing the workshop from a smartphone, you will have to swipe right to see the PowerPoint and additional webcam feed. We will be collecting the questions you have throughout the workshop, and we'll communicate them to Jake during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. This workshop is also being recorded and will be available for you to view on Arden's website. Now I will turn the workshop over to our guest, who is a knowledge expert in his field, and since we're talking cheese, it's safe to say his presentation will be legendary. Please welcome Jake Keller, professional cheesemonger of Downtown Cheese and Reading Terminal. Take it away, Jake.
Alrighty, I'm just connecting my camera. Hello, everyone. Can you hopefully hear me okay? I believe I'm connected. Hey, I am very excited that you guys can all be here today. I'm doing what I love. I'm talking cheese, building cheese boards. Got a pretty cool class lesson laid out for you today. Just to go over what we're going to be getting into, I brought, four really good crowd pleasing, some of my favorite cheeses. I'd like to go over kind of what they are, what makes them different. We'll talk flavor. And then I think we could, put together a cheese board. I've got some meats to go with it too. We'll go talk about pairings, kind of how to plate a cheese board and what to really expect from all of that. Now, I work here at the Reading Terminal Market. Right now, we're in the city kitchen of the Reading Terminal Market, but I'm at Downtown Cheese. I guess what you call a cheese monger, but really I consider myself a cheese enthusiast. I still have a lot to learn, but I'm pretty well, versed in selling cheese and just kind of talking flavor and doing all of that. Now with that, I think I'd like to kind of just jump right into it. I think I'm going to start introducing some of the cheeses that I've brought with me here. I got them all laid out by my side. But first comes first, I'm going to start with some of our milder flavors and then work our way up. It's a normal progression of tasting cheeses. But in my hand here, hopefully you can all see it, I've got the fromage de meaux. This guy here, I'll give you a little close-up too so we can all get a good look. So this is the fromage de meaux. It's a really classic French brie style. In order to be a brie, what separates brie from other brie style cheeses is that it has to be coming from a certain region of France. This is the same for a lot of other foods that you might know of, like a certain type of Virginia ham, or maybe a champagne coming from a certain region of France. Same thing for cheese too. To be that real fromage de meaux, it has to come from the Ile-de-France region, which is just outside of Paris. Now, the fromage de meaux here, I like a lot just because it's a good crowd pleaser, although it still has some pretty bold flavor to it. It's what's called a Bloomy rind cheese. Aged a minimum of 60 days, it grows this natural mold rind on the outside. This mold rind is from a fungus called Penicillium camemberti, which is a common rind or a common mold inoculant for brie-style cheeses. But with that, it usually provides a bit more of that kind of like rich, mushroomy flavor, and it kind of it neutralizes some of the acids in the cheese, which breaks down the calcium and proteins and helps give it that kind of creamy, smooth texture to it. Again, flavor-wise, what we could expect from this is like a rich, buttery quality, very creamy. You can definitely taste a little bit like a subtle hay-like, almost grass flavor. You can kind of see that too, a little straw color to it. But again, nice, bold, mushroomy. Now I'm going to be plating this one first. When it comes to building cheese boards, I like to start with my cheeses, just because I think it's a good order of operation. They tend to be the star of the show. So I like to kind of put those down first and then build around them. So with this, I'm gonna cut off a little piece here. I'm gonna give it a taste too, just to remind myself really what we're getting into. It's always good to taste what you're putting down on your board, especially if you're gonna be serving it to guests, just to make sure it's not too strong. Now each piece of cheese is different, and each wheel is different. they ripen with age, like a fruit would. They start off usually pretty mild in general, and as they age, they get stronger and stronger. Now for my cheese board, I'm going to cut a little bit of a smaller piece just because, well, honestly, it's just going to be me eating it. And although I can eat a lot of cheese, this one's going to be a little toned down. So I'm probably going to cut a 1/4 pound here. It's hard to eye, what a 1/4 pound really is sometimes. And if you don't know how much cheese to buy, there is a good rule of thumb. It's 2 ounces of cheese per person, if you're serving a party. But I usually just like to have a good amount to make it look, aesthetically pleasing and whatnot. But for me, for right now, a 1/4 pound will do. Now, where to put this on my board, usually with the softer cheeses, something that I'm going to attack with a knife, at a party instead of like pre-cubing it. I like it near the edge of the board. That way it's easy to access and easy to cut, instead of reaching over everything and essentially shuffling everything around. So I think for this guy, the first move is always the hardest. I am going to just toss it right there. Every board I make is different. I don't really have a certain style, but I think this one's going to be a little more kind of organic feeling. I'm not going to just stick to right angles. I'm going to have a little more flowing, but hopefully you'll see that come together as we move along here. And so that was cheese number 1. Actually, before I forget, I'd like to give it a little taste in front of you guys and you can kind of see what I think about it. Each one of my cheeses are going to have a bite taken out of them just because I'm going to try them in front of you here. So let's see. I'm going to give this a little bite just to talk a little more flavor with you. Now, guys, we're keeping it safe here. I have my gloves on. We're washing hands, and we're keeping distance here in the market. So I'm going to drop the mask for just a sec as I take a bite. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So overall, the mouthfeel on that is just great. It's smooth, it's rich, it's creamy. Now I've let these cheeses warm up and get to room temperature. Excuse me, I'm still chewing. But I always recommend letting your cheese come to room temperature because that's going to give you the most flavor. It's when those, aroma molecules are a little more volatile. They'll kind of, absorb into your nostrils a little better and you'll taste it. It'll be a little smoother in texture typically. And it's just how it's supposed to be served. Something like this, you could heat up in the oven, but I'm just going to serve it as is. I'm going to move on to cheese number 2 here, which is going to be my Humboldt Fog. And that's this guy, the Humboldt. This is a great option. This is kind of it's a fun cheese because a lot of people aren't familiar with goat's milk, I find, and sometimes can be hesitant with that. They're afraid it might be too strong for their liking, but this is a good crowd pleaser. Probably one of the more popular cheeses coming out of the United States. It's made in Humboldt County, California by a company called Cypress Grove, and they've been a really big pioneer of American goat's milk cheeses. One of the few cheeses to be exported out of the country to France. So if France is importing it, it's probably going to be some good stuff. Again, I'm going to cut a little piece from my board. I'll give it a taste. We'll talk some flavor and we'll talk pairings on this guy. I'm going to move that fromage de meaux out of the way. Let me just set that guy aside over here. Throw this down on my fancy wire cutter. Now, this is something I use at the cheese shop, a wire cutter. It's a board with a built-in wire and spring system on the bottom, which just makes it easy to cut soft or hard cheeses. If you don't have a wire board at home, your cheese monger, any other good cheese monger, would be happy to cut you any size piece, but any plastic sharp knife should do the trick. Now, something like this Humboldt Fog, it's pretty unique because it has a line of vegetable ash running through the middle. It's a really defining feature for, actually, it's classic in a lot of French cheeses. A traditional one is Morbier that you might be familiar with. It's a little more meaty, beefy, pungent wash rind style. The vegetable ash is all aesthetic in this cheese. While it provides maybe just a subtle, earthy flavor, it just gives it a nice kind of like layer cake presentation. You'll also note this cheese while I have it here. There's a kind of a double texture going on. Towards the middle, a little more dense and crumbly. And towards that outer rind, it's got a nice little creaminess. And that's because, like on the fromage de meaux, that first cheese, this is a Bloomy rind cheese. That natural rind, it breaks down the acids inside and creates that creamy texture. Because this is a little more dense, you get a little more definition between those cream lines. But right, there's a serious textural difference there. So I'm going to give it a little taste. I'll throw it down on my plate. Again, a softer cheese, I'll probably keep closer to the border of my plate, just so it's easier to cut. We're not moving things around. And I'm thinking for this guy, I am going to toss him right there. Now, for the most part, I probably will cut all my cheeses to the same size. If you have a really strong, flavorful cheese, sometimes a little bit can go a long way. so you might not need as much, maybe those milder brie styles. But right, this humble fog and the fromage de mar are fairly comparable, good crowd pleasers. But I'll give it a little taste, and we'll talk flavor again. See if it's still good. I'm in love with that ooey, creamy texture towards that outer side, so I always tend to take a little more from the outer, and I'll leave the inner for maybe my guest. But I'll give this a little sample here. Hmm. 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 There's really one way, I think, to describe this flavor, and it is goaty. It's a very unique, tangy, acidic bite that comes from goat's milk cheese, which is higher in essence itself compared to like cow's milk or sheep's milk. But there's always something light, tangy, kind of like in a way, a Greek yogurt tang would have to it. But by itself, it's beautiful. Or almost like a sour cream in a way too. But with that, I think I'll move on to maybe my third cheese that I brought out to show you guys. A personal favorite of mine. I love this style of cheese. This falls into the category of an aged Gouda. And this one's called the Euphoria. And now the name of this cheese is a pun. It's Euphoria, spelled E-W-E, Euphoria. And that's because it's a sheep's milk. It's from a ewe, a female sheep. This guy here is aged for about a year or so. And so with that, it's going to be a little more of a firm, slightly drier texture to it. And it's starting to develop what's called flavor crystals. While in reality, crystals don't actually have a whole lot of flavor. They might have a subtle, salty kick to them. They tend to be tyrosine, calcium, or magnesium based themselves. But they grow in most aged cheeses as those liquids kind of expel out, leaving behind those solids. Now, flavor-wise on something like this Euphoria, being a sheep's milk cheese, sheep's milk tends to have a bit more of a rich, nutty flavor to it, almost reminiscent of like an olive oil, that kind of like oiliness that it would have. And so you kind of pick up on those notes compared to like the cow's milk or the tangy goat. I like pairing this cheese. Usually on a board, I'll do a soft and a medium, a hard cheese. I like to switch it up with a cow's milk, a goat's milk, and a sheep's milk cheese. And so this is one of my go-to sheep's milk cheeses. It's not all too common. I mean, you can find it in a lot of stores, but it's just a great crowd pleaser. You can't go wrong with something like this Euphoria aged Gouda. So I'm going to cut a little piece on my wire board, sized out for my tray here. And again, you don't need a whole lot. It's not a super powerful cheese. So maybe I'll keep, with my same amount that I was doing before, about a quarter pound. But you might even be able to tell from me cutting it, it's got a little more body to it, a little more texture, some pretty solid stuff. And yeah, I'm going to lay this down. I'm thinking a little more towards the back. Again, what I'm going to do on this guy is I'm going to start it off with I'm going to chisel off a few pieces just to kind of show my guests that it's okay to really whack at this. You can make a little bit of a wet mess. Sometimes people are afraid to take that first bite of cheese. Don't be afraid. It's one of the better bites. You should always take that first bite. So I'm going to just start this off so my guests can kind of tell that they're able to just go in with their knife, or the knives that I'll leave out, and just grab a piece. We'll kind of pre-cut some of these chunks here. You might have noted, this one does not have a bloomy rind like the first two. It's actually going to be a paraffin wax rind that lines the outside of this. And as we approach towards that rind, there's a little section of drier cheese there. It's very pressed cheese, and so texturally, it has a bit more of a firm bite to it that might be unpleasant to eat. So you don't have to eat super close to that rind. But I recommend if you have all these rinds that you're not eating, if the rind isn't really your thing, you can save them. A lot of times you can grate that cheese off later and include it in maybe like a pasta dish or throw it into a soup just to kind of give it a little more flavor. So don't throw away those rinds. We'll keep them in mind. So I'm just going to steal a little bit of that Euphoria and I'll try it out. Again, just to make sure I'm still liking it. I mean, compared to the first two, it's like a whole nother world. It's rich. It has a slight creamy quality overall. So on the tongue, it is a little more dry. You can kind of feel a little chalkiness to it. You get a little crunch from those tyrosine calcium crystals that are building up in there. But flavor-wise, there's this beautiful underlying sweetness that kind of hides behind everything, almost like a sweet toffee kind of thing going on back there, a little caramelized action. And those are just the natural sugars in the milk caramelizing. You can almost see it in the color there too. It's got a little more of that dark color to it. Now, something like this aged Gouda, it pairs pretty well with most things. I mentioned a little bit, you could use it to cook with, although it is a little more on the pricey side in general compared to your typical like Grana Parmesan style. This could really add a nice layer to a salad if you're shaving pieces on top, or again, like grating it into a pasta dish. It could melt very well into a pesto or something like that. Alrighty, so I'm going to break out the fourth cheese that I brought, and this is one of my favorites. This guy here is made with raw cow's milk, which I'm just totally in love with. I feel you definitely get the most flavor out of raw milk. But this cheese, it's called the Schlossberger Alt. Again, it's the Schlossberger Alt, made near the Schlossberg ruins of Bern, Switzerland. Switzerland makes a lot of really great, what's called Alpine-style cheeses. And that's, a pretty popular style. You'll find like Gruyere is an Alpine-style cheeses. You can find Alpine raclette. But the Schlossberger Alt is an Alpine-style, almost a Gruyere style, aged for about 2 years. So again, you're starting to get a little bit of that crystallized action going on. You'll get a little crunch in the texture, but it's a little more smooth and creamy compared to that Euphoria. While it's aging, it's able to keep a little more moisture. Maybe it's aged in a little more of a humid environment, so it's not going to dry out as much. And also, the natural bacteria rind on the outside will allow moisture to not only, escape as it's aging, but to kind of, keep in there. You can absorb more flavors from the outside area that you're aging in. But anyway, this Schlossberger Alt, it can be a little on the strong side. It really does have a bold, kind of meaty, beefy flavor. If you're familiar with Gruyere, it's reminiscent of that, but there's a little more of a natural kind of barnyardy quality that you get out of the Schlossberger, so maybe to put it lightly. While it might not be for all of your guests, you could totally melt this down just to like really give you a little added kick to the fondue that you're doing, or melt it over potatoes or something of the sort. Caramelized onions might be pretty good too. But for our purposes, we're going to just throw it down on our cheese plate. We're going to use the tangy flavor of the Humboldt fog and the smooth, buttery quality, the little sweet note of that Euphoria to kind of balance those strong flavors of the Schlossberger. But again, a lot of that flavor from the Schlossberger comes from it being a raw milk. Now, raw milks, they're not pasteurized. They're not heat treated as much. And so they preserve a lot of it's actually bacteria that gives it a lot of that flavor. Instead of killing off the harmful bacteria, it's allowing everything to kind of thrive and live and develop inside of that cheese. Cheese is a living thing, it comes in a full living wheel, and it's aging, as it's going along through that affinage process. But anyway, I'm going to cut off a little piece of this Schlossberger for our tray. I'm going to switch it up a little, maybe for my plating purposes, just to have it different. I'm going to cut this guy into little sticks. Just to kind of show my guests that it might be a stronger cheese. And so if I kind of pre-portion it out, they'll go for a smaller piece, just, they have to, it's what's available. So I'm just going to do that on my wire board. It makes things a little easier for me. Put that aside there. Now, if you're getting jealous of this wire cutter board that I have here, if you're thinking, man, I need one of those for my home, you can, find them in store, find them online. There are a couple really good brands. I'm using a Mr. Handy right now, Mr. Handy wire cutter board, popular for a lot of cheese shops. Also the Bosca brand, Boska. They are making great cheese tools. So if you ever need a cheese planer, cheese knives, or a wire cutting board, I could definitely recommend something like the Bosca brand, very reliable. And again, like I said, I'm going to just put these into little smaller bite-sized pieces, because a little can go a long way on something like this Schlossberger. I noted the first two have the natural Bloomy rind, perfectly edible. That third cheese, the Euphoria, has that paraffin wax rind, which you want to cut off and watch out for. But the natural rind on this Schlossberger, it's a little trickier. It's technically edible, but it's going to be very strong in flavor. So personally, I tend to, just cut it off, or I'll leave it on here. But I'll maybe warn my guests. I'll say, hey, that's got a little bite to it. You don't necessarily have to eat that if you don't want. I'm just doing a little fancy stacking over here. I think in the end it'll look nice. Oh, that one fell down, but that's okay. We'll leave it like that. It was meant to be. Put some of these guys on top like it never even happened. Boom. That looks good to me. Maybe one more right there just to finish it off. Beautiful, beautiful. Alrighty, so we've got these four cheeses down. They're kind of defining the layout of our cheese board. And so with this, I'll start to maybe build around it a little more. Oh, I nearly forgot. I'm going to take a bite of that Schlossberger just to show you that I still like it. If I'm serving it to my guests, I'm going to taste it myself. It's just a good rule of thumb. there is something about those Alpine cheeses from Switzerland with that natural bacteria rind where you can really taste the geography. I feel like they have this inherent quality of Switzerland, and it's not really a new thing or something I'm making up. In French, it's called terroir. I just refer to this tasting the land, the process, the tradition of the cheese. There's a lot of history and background that goes to baking cheese like this. And there are a lot of specifications. You know, you have to make these kind of traditional style cheeses. Maybe you're using a traditional style copper pot to boil your milks in. Maybe you're only letting your cows graze at certain times of the year at certain altitudes where the foliage is going to be a little more fresh and nutrient rich. And actually, that's going to be part of the inherent quality of an Alpine style cheese is that they're processed or the milk coming from higher altitudes, you know, on these mountains. So that's foliage, like I said, going to give you a little more nutrient rich milk. But all right. So for building this board, I have my cheeses down. What next? I usually like to go from here to my meat, which I have laid out just next to us right here. Now today, I've got two meats that I'm going to be building my board with. I've got the hot capicola, and I've got my sweet sopressata. These guys are coming from two different places. My sopressata is from here in Philadelphia, South Philadelphia, from the Claudio company. And something like that hot capicola is imported from Italy. It's the Danielle brand. There are two different styles. The sopressata is going to be ground, chopped pork, lightly seasoned with black pepper. And something like that capicola, or the gabagool, familiar with the Sopranos, is going to be a single cut. It's a muscle, actually, that runs from the neck down to the fifth rib. And so with that, you get a little more of that kind of clean, marbling quality, like you'd see in like a Wagyu beef or something like that. But I like this kind of variation. I usually like to do two different styles of meat on my plate just to keep it simple. I like the smaller rounds sliced up, just because it's easy to pick at. You know, if you have a huge slice of meat, it can be kind of hard to manage, hard for your guests to figure out really what to do with it. But for my purposes, I think I'm going to plate this down just kind of simply. I'm going to start with that sopressata, and I'm going to grab slice by slice. I'm just going to roll it up into little sticks. Makes for easy plating, easy pickings. So I'm going to show you how I do that. It's real easy. Just give it a little roll, a little pinch on the bottom. Never hurts. The sopressata likes it. I think I'm just going to put it right in the corner there. And I'll just make a little pile, a little stack up. I'm going to just keep rolling these sopressata logs. I'm going to roll a handful of them. You could put, you know, really whatever any kind of meat you like on your board. Sometimes I do take into consideration, if not all my guests as carnivorous as I am, sometimes I'll separate the meat from the cheeses and the other accoutrements just because to keep considerate. You don't want them touching, especially if they're vegetarians or vegans. So I guess the vegans wouldn't be doing the cheese board at all. But anyway, I'm going to lay this sopressata right down here in the corner just because I know I will be happy to eat all of this. How much meat you need? I usually like to think about it slice by slice. I know personally, I mean, I could say I could just eat it all, but I'd probably eat maybe 10, 15 slices of this sopressata in a single serving. If you're having a large party, usually people aren't eating as much. You could tone it down a little bit. You might only need 5 to 10 slices per person, but it's nice to keep that in mind. So if you're serving, you know, 5 guests or something like that, you know, you could, mental math, like 75 or something. Anyway, I usually keep it about 15 slices per guest or so if I know they're going to be a little hungrier. Same for the capicola, it's about the same size piece. But if you're using a big slice of prosciutto, you might only need 1 or 2 slices per guest. If you wanted to get creative, you could, you know, kind of prep a little antipasta style here. You could chop up those meats with a little cheese, a little olive oil, get some little veggie in there, maybe a little red pepper, yellow pepper, olive, make a little antipasto. Sopressata is always great for something like that. You could wrap up cheese sticks in the sopressata, which always makes for a nice kind of like light, playful snack on a board, easy pickings, I like to think. I'm going to roll up just 1 or 2 more here, and then I'm going to switch over to that capicola. I'll leave that just like that for now. And with my capicola, I think I put my sopressata on the left. I'm gonna switch it up. I'm gonna put the capicola on the right-hand side, and I'm gonna switch up the style that I'm doing too. I'm not gonna roll the capicola into sticks. I don't want it to be too monotonous on this board, not too gray. So I'm gonna roll these guys into little flowers. Sometimes it's hard if your meat is sliced thick. kind of like this first piece that I've got here. But if you give it a couple folds, 90-degree fold, another 90-degree fold. Again, pinch the bottom. The capicola doesn't mind. Just keeps it all together there. You can throw it right on the board. Now my hot capicola is seasoned with the classic cayenne pepper, hot chili flake, but it's not too hot. Usually these meats, they're not going to overwhelm your board. You don't want flavors that are too powerful, because if you were to eat like a super spicy piece of meat before you try anything else, it might ruin your tongue. Might not have the taste buds left to really savor everything else. So I'm going to lay what I'm calling these capicola flowers right along the side of my board here. Maybe I'm just going to create a little border down my edge, something to kind of give us a little more definition as we go along. Now my board has a little direction to it. I'm at the front of my board. I tend to always build my boards from the front. I think it's the easiest way to do it. And this is the side that I'm going to want my guests to approach the board from. I think it's nice to keep in mind the kind of feng shui of your cheese platter, your meat board, your charcuterie plate. It really does make a big difference in presentation and application. Anyway, I'm going to fold up a couple more of these hot capicola slices here. In fact, just because these flowers are looking so good, I think I'm going to give it a little taste too. I can't really resist. I always buy a little extra in case I drop a slice while I'm making a board, or in case I get very hungry while I'm putting together my cheese plates. There's always a little something extra to work with. So I think I'll just snack on this guy here if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Now sliced thin like that, I mean, it pretty much melts in your mouth. Same for the sopressata too. The sopressata is very rich compared to the capicola. Being a single cut, it tends to have a bit more of a direct flavor. It's very, what I kind of think of as porky. Being a prosciutto or a salumi, it's that cured, salted meat. You definitely get that sharp, salty bite. And for sure, a very pure, porky flavor. It's not super hot, like I said. And I know I'm kind of sensitive to spicy things. I kind of take it easy myself. But this is just enough for me, and probably most guests. So I'm going to lay that right there. And like I said, my board's going to have a bit more of an organic feel. So if your flowers aren't perfect, that's okay. None of us are. So I'm going to lay down one more. And that's good. Oh, good. That's some good volume. You could, keep your meat sliced thin, and you could lay it down in a little river that runs through your plate. Just keep it all flat. But I like a little volume. My cheese board, my meat board, I like it to kind of have a little more height to it. So I think those capicola flowers can give us a little poof, a little balloon to our platter. So anyway, I've got my cheeses down, and I've got my meats down. And really, I think the next step is kind of adding in our accoutrements, our accessories that we have. If you partook in the gift baskets and had those sent to your house, you can use what we sent to. I believe that included fruits, nuts, maybe some dried vegetable chips or fruit chips, that kind of thing. Crackers, jams, and jellies are always great for a plate. But you could switch it up a little. You can include hot things on your cheese platter too. Maybe I'd recommend keeping it separate from your cheese. But if you wanted to make like a hot dip to put on your cheese plate, you could always do that. Putting French fries on a cheese plate is a unique and creative idea. Like I feel like I don't see that enough on a cheese platter. So anyway, I'm going to keep mine cold today. So I have, let's see, all this laid out. I've got a beautiful open section kind of here in the front and the middle of my board. Also that left corner. So I'm going to fill up those empty spaces. I like to see a little of my board, especially on a beautiful wooden board like this one. But at the same time, I love those beautiful ingredients. So I'm going to really fill it up here. I've got some little tools, here with me. I've got measuring cups. I've got little scoop spoons. These are a nice way to kind of just do something different on the cheese board. So I think I'm going to utilize these guys. I've also got a little bamboo accessories. You could probably find these in most home goods stores. But just having those around makes a nice little touch for a cheese plate. But I'm going to stick with my metal for now. Maybe I'll bring in one of those guys. Let's see here. I think we grab the slightly larger one. Maybe starting with some of my savorier options. I like these veggie chips that we've got. Having a little crunchy texture on your platter. Switching up the texture is always a good idea. It can get a little lame if it's all very smooth and creamy. But having a little bright crunch is always a plus. I'm going to load those right into this spoon here. I like to think about my colors on a cheese plate too. Having everything, yellow, brown can be a little much. I like some red pops from a strawberry, maybe a grape. I like, these fall colors too. I keep it a little seasonal. We got the holidays coming up, and it's a perfect time to make a cheese board. I mean, any time is a perfect time to make a cheese board. But if you're, going to have maybe a small crowd over this year, maybe 4 or less, I don't know. If there's a pandemic going on, it's not going to be huge. Keeping it tight is always good. I'm going to put a couple more of these guys on just to really fill things up. I got it here. Put that in the front. Remember, I don't want to block my path to those softer cheeses just because we are going to be kind of cutting them on the spot on the board. So you want to be able to kind of easily reach around and spread it a little bit. Whereas these harder cheeses, we can kind of really bury in there. More of my savory options that I brought out today, I always tend to throw some olives on my plate. I'm realizing my spoon here is not large enough. I'm going to go for one larger so I can really fill it up. I tend to eat a lot of my olives. Well, the serving dish we have in now wouldn't be bad. You could always just throw a little something like that right on your platter. But I'm gonna mix it up. I'm gonna take a couple out. I'll include them right here in my little measuring cup. It's a cute little cozy way. Oh, but again, right, for the holidays, if you have themed accessories that you wanted to put on your plate, it's always cool too. You could add a little candle on there, a little menorah, or maybe a mini Christmas tree of rosemary or something like that, just to kind of add some decoration. Candle might be a little risky if you have a wobbly table, if you have rowdy guests, but at your own risk. I think I usually like a nice aesthetic board. That's going to go all out with my decorations and accessories. So again, I'm going to fill that up, make it look good. Maybe I'll put one red olive on the side, a little rogue, make it look like there's a little action going on here. I don't want to block my soft cheeses. I'll keep that off to the side. Now I'll go for some of those sweeter ingredients, the fruits that we brought out. We have some mixed nuts with dried fruits in there, like raisins and cranberries and dried strawberries, but always add a nice touch to your board. I'm really big into medjool dates or dried figs. Moroccan or black figs are always great for a cheese plate and tend to go pretty well with most cheeses too. Fig, goat cheese is always a classic combo. Don't throw a little honey on your board, but like I said, I'm going to stick with these sweeter fruits for now. I'm going to grab a bushel, my red grapes, a manageable sized bit here. Oh, wow. I like keeping it on the vine. It always looks good to me. Although this is a very large vine, I think I'm going to try to make it work. I'm going to maybe move some of my capicola slices. I'm going to tuck it right back here. I can kind of build up the back of my board because, like I said, we're not really going to have to reach over it. My guests are going to be approaching the board from my side, so it'll be pretty easy. I'm going to grab a grape from the back and not knock around any of my cheeses. That looks good on the grapes. I'm going to balance the other side with some strawberries. When I'm putting down these accessories on my cheese board, I like to think about what pairs with what. So for something, a little more strong, tangy flavor, the hot capicola can hold up to that humble fog pretty well. But that tang could use a little sweet to kind of cut that fight. So I like the grapes right there nearby. The Schlossberger Alt being a little stronger, it could probably handle a few strawberries. I'm going to toss these strawberries back there. Strawberries will give us a little bit of that acidic kick. And again, a beautiful little red pop to kind of help things stand out. And I can crowd these guys here in the back just because, they're not soft cheeses. They're not going to be spread around as much. They're easy pickings. So I'm going to make a little river of strawberries that kind of hug my Schlossberger. Alrighty. I'll get 1 or 2 more down here. You can chop up your fruit. Totally cool. You might want to watch out for browning apples or pears or something of the sort of bananas. A little fruit salad is always, I think, a nice touch upboard. We get a little volume here. I'm going to stack some of these strawberries. I don't mind if my ingredients touch, but if you're a little picky, you don't have to. You can keep things spread out with a larger board. Or if you wanted, you can kind of keep 2 boards, make maybe a series of platters that can help really come together with a meal. And so let's see, I really want to make sure I'm using all my ingredients so I can have a nice impressive platter. I still got some of my dried fruits left. I'm thinking these guys, they can just go right on the board. I'm just kind of feeling a little empty on my left-hand side here. I'm going to give the sopressata some love. Looks like I got dried pineapple chunks here, little banana chips. There's papaya cubes I'm seeing. Yeah, I think so. Those will be good. Beautiful color on those. I think the sweet candied fruits will go pretty well with my euphoria. I'm not going to crowd that brie too much just because as it, kind of melts on my board, as we let it sit out and get to room temp, it might start to ooze into those accessories. Maybe we don't want them touching, or maybe you do. But anyway, I'm going to lay these down here. My chunks of euphoria can kind of mingle with those banana chips. They're all friendly. Got some dried nuts in there. Again, dried nuts, always a great accessory. Cashews, almonds, candied nuts too are one of my favorites. I think a little sweet bite with the savory cheese is always nice. So the toffee nuts or the candied walnuts are always a really nice touch. So, alrighty. We're looking good here. And the one thing that I didn't put on yet are my crackers. Now, sometimes I'll put these on midway through my board if I'm going to make maybe a border of crackers to kind of hug everything. But I left a nice big open space right here in the center of my board. And I think I'm just going to make a nice little kind of mountain of crackers that people can pick at. Again, that'll give us a little height for our cheese board, switch things up a little bit. It'll be very accessible. It'll let people know that you can go right to the start, right in the middle of that board, grab a cracker, and then work your way out from there. As I lightly touched on, there's a little order of operations. If I was serving these to guests, and I'd maybe recommend which cheese to start with, I'd start with the milder flavors. So I would work in the same order that we've gone, from that fromage de Montbrie to the humbled fog, euphoria, and finishing with that Schlossberger. You could start your meal with a cheese plate. You could finish your meal with a cheese plate. You know, it's a great digestive, a good dessert for after a nice heavy meal. Help things settle a little. Like I said, let me grab some of these crackers. Start with these big ones. I'll lay those down. If you want, you could break them up and just put them on your plate. But I think, for my purposes, I am going to leave them whole. I'm going to back them in the other direction, a little more aesthetically pleasing. My board in general slopes from the back to the front, and a lot of my cheese boards tend to do this. I just think it's like a stadium, you know, like a coliseum of flavor that just guards or draws everything right to right to the guests, straight into your mouth. Let's throw down some of these crackers here. We got some maybe what looks like an everything bagel cracker, flaxseed cracker. I've got some whole wheat. Anything works. I love a good water cracker with a nice rosemary sea salt or garlic Asiago works as well. I usually like to just keep these little stacks nice and clean, but if you want, you could, like I said, break up the larger crackers, maybe make a little pile or a log cabin stacking pattern, whatever kind of floats your boat, whatever floats your cabin. Like I said, I got some hollow spaces and I have some ingredients left over, so I'm going to fill those up a little more here. Once everything's in place, it's nice to kind of come back and fill up some of the empty spaces, because once you build those walls of crackers or fruits, you can kind of pile up the smaller accessories next to them a little easier. And, you know, I've used all my ingredients here, everything that I had out. I've used my metal cup accessories. I got my cheeses and meats on the board, my fruits. I think it's looking pretty good. So this is something I would probably serve to maybe a party of, 4, 5 people would be appropriate. Certainly there'd be enough for everyone to get a taste of each cheese. There might even be just a touch left over. But I think that would be a good amount to serve that size crowd. But, you know, if you're not sure, you could always go to your local cheese monger, your local cheese enthusiast, and you could ask us behind the counter how much you're thinking, you know, for your party. Yeah, this is my board here. And guys, I'd love to hear, you know, any questions that you might have about how I put this board together. If you'd like to know anything about my background or anything, really, I'd love to hear it too. So maybe we could open it up to a little Q&A. If there's anything you guys want to ask me, I think now would be a great time for that.
Yes, Jake, we do have a bunch of questions that are coming in. One question that we have is, how many cheeses should you have versus how many meats should you have on your board?
Mm-hmm. For sure. One of the more common questions I get, definitely, is like, what kind of variety should I have on my board? I usually like to have a minimum of 3 cheeses. It's totally up to you. If you have one great cheese that you want to focus on, if that's the start of your show, you only need one. But I like to have some balance with it. So maybe if I have one cheese, I'll balance that with some, you know, counter accessories. But what I normally do is 3 cheeses. I'll go a soft, a medium, a hard, maybe a mild, an intermediate, and then something with a little more of a bold flavor to it. And that could be a cow, goat, sheep, or buffalo milk, you know, whatever you have lying around. Can't exclude blue cheeses. Maybe something like I would do a soft cheese, a hard cheese, and a blue cheese. I probably wouldn't do just the blue cheese because maybe it's not everyone's favorite unless you really know your crowd. But I think a minimum of 3 cheeses is always nice. And again, a nice variety of flavors and textures, soft, medium, hard, cow, goat, sheep, and strong to mild. Mm-hmm.
Great. Our next question is, can you eat the rind on most cheeses?
Oh, yes, excuse me. I was getting some capicola out of my teeth when you asked that question. A lot of the rinds on these cheeses, well, I guess half the rinds on these cheeses are going to be edible. Any white, light, bloomy rind, like on that brie style there, you can kind of break apart with your fingers. It's pretty soft. Or that Humboldt fog, you know, it's the same thing. It's that same bloomy rind. Those are perfectly edible. And in fact, that's where you're going to get a lot of the flavor and a lot of the nutrients are coming from the rinds and those soft, bloomy cheeses. They tend to suck the nutrients straight out of the cheeses. But you'll notice on something like that Euphoria, the aged sheepsmilk Gouda that we put on our board, but again, I've got right over here a nice hearty chunk. That's a plastic paraffin rind, not plastic, it's a wax paraffin rind on that cheese. And so it would be inedible. It would be pretty tough. And as you get closer to that rind, you'll see it gets, again, a little drier, a little tougher, a little more pressed, and not as flavorful. A lot of that flavor seems to be kind of squeezed out of the rind. So I probably wouldn't recommend, you know, really going too close to that rind on the Euphoria. But the Schlossberger, it's a tricky situation. It's a natural bacteria rind. Theoretically, it's perfectly edible. As you get closer to the rind, again, the cheese is a little more pressed and tough, but it's very flavorful. In fact, most of that bold kind of barnyardy flavor from the Schlossberger lies in that rind there. And so personally, it's too much for me. I won't eat it. I'll cut it off. Maybe I'll save it later to throw into a stock or a soup. And I'll probably recommend to my guests too that they'll cut off the rind for something like the Alpine style, the Schlossberger. If you see text or writing or paper on the outside of your cheese, certainly recommend taking it off. A lot of the times the cheese will come wrapped in paper and it can get a little stuck there. So you could scrape it off with your knife. You know, if you eat a little bit, it happens. But it's for the most part, half of the cheeses that we're serving today, I'd say have that edible rind. And the other half, I'd say you can cut that off.
All right. And we also have a bunch of people asking, what type of wine would you serve with this board? A red, white,
Sure.
Is there any specific?
You know, everyone has their own palate. When someone asks me what wine to pair with a certain cheese, I usually like to go by region. It's a safe bet that if they eat a certain cheese in a certain region, they drink a wine in that region that'll also go pretty well with that cheese. So something like, you know, maybe that the fromage de meaux, that brie style that we have, it's a little more rich and buttery. So I'd probably go for maybe something with a little dry bite to it. I might go for like a white Sauvignon Blanc. I could see that acidic cut of the wine cutting that rich, buttery quality pretty well. But when we're talking something like the tangy Humboldt Fog or that sweet, salty Euphoria, I think fruitier flavors would go pretty well with that. So a sweet red, I think, would be pretty good. You could go into a rosé, even something like a champagne could be pretty nice. I find that, you know, sparkling wines are pretty versatile when it comes to a cheese board, or sparkling things in general. If you have a hard cider, you could pair that with your cheeses. A hard cider would go perfectly with that Euphoria or the Humboldt Fog, that crisp apple. It's kind of fall oriented too, kind of moving into the holiday season. I think that would be very appropriate. But again, pairing wines by region with your cheeses is always safe. And if you have those salty flavors, I like sweeter wines, or those buttery, beefy flavors, I think go pretty well with something a little more tart, like a dry white. Be pretty good. General rule of thumb.
All right. Another question is, how do you store your leftover cheeses?
Oh, yeah, totally. Great question. For leftover cheese, you know, there are rules. For younger cheeses, I didn't go too much into the aging of these cheeses, but the fromage de meaux and the Humboldt Fog tend to be aged around 60 days. And so they're pretty fresh in a way. And so there's still a lot of moisture to them. And if you trap that moisture in there with like plastic wrap, a Ziploc bag, or a Tupperware container, that's how you start to see some of that mold growth. Now, mold isn't the end of your cheese. It scrapes right off the surface. As long as it's not penetrating all the way through the cheese, you know, it comes right off. Still perfectly edible. But for drier cheeses, you can give it a tight, you know, sort of airtight wrap, vacuum sealed, Tupperware containers. There's not a lot of moisture in there that's going to start that mold growth. So something like the Euphoria or the Schlossberger Alt, if you have the plastic wrap at home or a Ziploc bag, those should be fine for it. But the softer cheeses, I'd say something like wax paper is always good. At the cheese shop that I'm at, Downtown Cheese, we wrap our cheeses in deli paper. It's the classic kind of white sheet paper. And maybe we'll put like a little bit of wax paper just over the cheese. If you leave a lot of surface area exposed, that's when it tends to dry out. And I find that a cheese drying out is usually the first way that it'll go bad instead of getting moldy or going rancid, like a lot of people might think. It really takes a while for a cheese to go bad. I mean, it's always aging. It's always getting stronger. So it's up to you when it gets too strong, too ripe in a way.
All right. Our next question is, what would you use the hole on the cheese board for that's now covered up with grapes?
Oh yeah, for sure. I covered that up because I'm going to be leaving my cheese board right here. But in general, it's usually a good thumb spot. You know, a good way to carry your board around if you're going to be bringing it from the kitchen out to a serving table. That's a nice spot. If you wanted to get creative, like I mentioned earlier, you know, that could be where you put your candle. Your holiday candle can go right there, or a little decoration or something like that. Maybe that could be a spot to hold toothpicks. But I think in general, usually a hole on a board or a pallet would be for carrying.
Okay. Our next question is, do you suggest chocolate or even something sweet on your board? Have you ever heard of someone putting cookies on their board?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, my Halloween cheese board that I put together certainly included some cookies, a little bit of my leftover Halloween candy on there. Anything that's kind of seasonal and appropriate. But holiday cookies on a cheese board, little dark chocolates go really well, especially if you're doing like a dessert themed board. Something like those, like rich triple cream brie styles with a little bit of dark chocolate tend to go really well. Or as I mentioned, maybe an aged manchego would go really well with some sweet toffee cashews or butter toffee walnuts, that kind of thing. I know De Bruno's has a good black lava sea salt cashew that I like to snack on a lot, and that pairs very well on a cheese plate. Little candied items are always nice. But again, it's a lot about balancing those flavors. If you have a lot of salt on there, I think a little sweet is always a good counterpart.
All right. Our next question is, what's your number one recommendation for a date night cheese board?
Date night cheese board. I guess it depends if it's going to be the first date or maybe the last date. I don't know. But I guess the cheese board could make it or break it. It really depends. There are some really good crowd pleasers, I find. Maybe there are some even sexy cheeses that I'd recommend out there. Something like, again, I'll mention it, those triple cream cow's milk cheeses. One of my personal favorites, the Delice de Bourgogne. It's just oozy, buttery. I mean, the cheese itself is practically like sensual. So I think that's a great option for a date night cheese board. Or maybe your date night is revolving around watching a movie and hanging out in the dark. The aesthetics of your cheese board aren't going to matter as much in the dark, but you'll want just a nice cheese that's easy to pick at. You're not going to make a lot of noise shuffling around the board. Something like an aged cheddar or Gouda, easy to cube up. But again, I think it's appropriate to have crowd-pleasing cheeses, especially if it's that first date and you don't know what your partner might like. You know, a nice classic cheese is a good option. And if you don't know what a good classic cheese is, a manchego, the Humboldt fog that we have here, or I'd say that Euphoria should do the trick. You know, I highly recommend trying those out if you haven't had them.
All right. And then we do have a little bit of a personal question for you. Where did you get your training, and what is your favorite cheese?
Oh, that second one's a hard one. Well, the first one's easy for me. I've been cutting the cheese all my life. I've been doing it professionally for maybe about 10 years. So now I've worked in a couple cheese shops. So really I'm well versed in imported European cheeses. And so my training really comes from just having access to a large variety of cheeses and being able to taste each one. I think the best way to learn a cheese is to really just take a bite. And that kind of helps me memorize the name. Once I taste it, I can really kind of hold down a lot of the information that I can kind of associate with the flavor, the scent, and the texture. So if I taste the cheese once, I can usually remember the name and all that. I've spent plenty of time online. I have a few go-to resources online that I love to use. Wikipedia, I found, is only okay for cheese knowledge, but there's one that I really go to all the time. I highly recommend checking it out. It's called Cheese Science Toolkit. Again, it's cheesesciencetoolkit.org online. It's a great resource for learning about the more kind of chemistry behind cheese. But I think getting familiar with the chemistry behind it really helps talk about the flavors, certainly helps selling and approaching different kinds of cheese. But again, a lot of my background comes from researching online, tasting cheeses, and there are a couple good cheese textbooks out there. You can take cheese classes. They tend to be a little pricey. They're not as approachable as really going to your local cheese shop and just tasting a handful of cheeses. You could come on by to my store and hang out all day, and we'll chat cheddar. We'll sample some cheeses, and we could figure it out. And I'm happy to give anyone a lesson too. Personally, I was just kind of personally invested. I found when I first started working with cheese, I had no idea there was such a variety out there. I kind of grew up eating nothing but craft singles and smoked Gouda. So when I came into a cheese shop and saw over 100 different types, it became my mission to kind of become familiar with it. And then just tasting the cheese and learning a little bit of the history, I realized there's this whole culture. I mean, especially here in Philadelphia, there's a whole culture of cheesemongers and enthusiasts who are just happy to talk about the cheese and the importance and like the cultural context behind it. But yeah, I just found it personally fascinating. Anything we find fascinating, it'll be easy to learn about.
All right, and your favorite?
Oh, right. My personal favorite. It's tough. It's tough. You know, every week at the shop, we're getting in pretty much new product, stuff that I've never tried before. So I'm learning all these new cheeses basically weekly. So picking a favorite depends on the week. But one that I do always find myself going back to, I love young French goat's milk cheeses. And there's a certain style of goat's milk cheese that comes coated in plant coal or vegetable ash. To name a specific cheese, there's one, the Valençay, and it's a truncated pyramidal shaped goat's milk cheese from the central region of France. And it has that vegetable ash coating on the outside. Like these brie styles or the Humboldt fog, it grows its own kind of natural bloomy rind over time. But it's a different type of mold that grows on there. And with that, you get a bit more of this like sweet, like white wine, kind of fermented grapey flavor with those smooth, like tangy, goaty flavors of the base, the interior of the cheese. And so I love the Valençay. It's a great option if you've never tried it before. Kind of hard to come by. A lot of shops don't really carry those younger French-style goat's milk cheeses. Like I said, a downtown cheese, we got them. So there's always good access to that, the Valençay.
All right, and we do have time for one more question. If
more?
someone wanted you to make a board for them, could they buy a board like this, or do you have kits that they can buy with the cheeses and meats already picked out?
Oh, yeah. Totally. If you didn't feel like putting together your own board, give us a little notice, 24 hours notice in the shop. We'll put together whatever you want. We have a starter menu for cheese boards, having some like basic crowd pleasers, anywhere up to a perfectly custom board where you can decide whatever you want on there as far as crackers and the accoutrements go. And the cheeses, we'll do whatever you like. Or I'm happy if you don't really want us to put it together, but you still like some recommendations. Super easy for me to run through the case and pick out some great cheeses that'll pair well together for you to kind of put together at home. You could build your own board. I'll recommend the meats, the olives, and the accessories to go with all the cheeses that we've selected at the shop. So for sure, if you'd like to order a holiday board, we've got them ready.
All right, and that was our last question.
All righty. Well, if that's the last question, I think that was a lot of fun. I'm so glad you guys could make it. And yeah, you know, if you're interested in any of the cheeses that you saw here today, you just wanted to try them out, try something new, maybe learn a little more about cheese that you haven't had before, please stop by the shop. It's my pleasure. It's why I do it. It's teaching people about cheese. I love to see people's reaction as they try something new, maybe something they didn't expect to like a funky goat's milk cheese. But yeah, please come by the shop and we'll try something out. For any holiday orders you might have, we're going to be perfectly open. Or guys, also, actually, I do want to throw in there, if you have a personal interest in checking out some of the cool new cheese that we got, and you can find me on Instagram. I have my own cheese account. Give myself a little shout out. It's Young Cheeses, Young_Cheeses. You find me on Instagram, I'm always posting, just what I find interesting. It's some of the cheeses that most people aren't going to be familiar with, but the new stuff at the shop that we're happy to sell and what's looking good. Yeah, check me out at Young Cheeses or just stop by the shop. I'd love to see you there.
All right, well, great. Thank you, Jake and Sarah. I can say on behalf of the viewers, I feel confident that your presentation tonight was quite Gouda. So we would also like to thank everyone for attending. There will be a short survey sent out via email, and would love to hear your feedback to help us improve for our future workshops. Thank you, stay safe, and happy holidays.